Have you guys ever had one of those days before? Like, you know what type of day I'm talking about, like one of those days? I had one a couple weeks ago. My little guy David, he's second grader at Willowdale, and like, I was like, one day I was working, it was like a Wednesday, and I get to the office Wednesday, I get there at 7:30, and I was going to work until 2 o'clock or 2:15 when I have to go pick them up because they get out early, and I was hungry because I didn't have, the poor pastor just has to work straight through. You guys just work me to death, and didn't have time for lunch, so I went and got some Chick-fil-A. Now, I love Chick-fil-A. Like, it's not open Sunday, so you guys are going to get the craving for it and drive by there and realize it's closed and be mad at me. I'm just going to save you that right now. So you get the sandwich and those hot fries that are all crinkly, and I get the Arnold Palmer. Like, they have the best lemonade, and they mix it in with some iced tea, and that's what I get. And I was kind of nibbled on the fries, and I went and picked David up, and he smelled the chicken sandwich. It was like a shark going after a fish, and he asked if he could have a bite. I gave it back to him. I thought he'd just take a bite. We got home, and like the whole chicken sandwich is gone. That was like 2 months ago. But the bad day was I go to it's like 2 o'clock. I said, "Oh, I gotta go eat David Chick-fil-A." Who eats like lunch at 2 o'clock? I mean, besides the overworked pastor that doesn't have time for lunch. So there's one car in front of me, and I don't know like what was going on, but I kind of timed it where I just get the sandwich, go to Willowdale, pick him up. And I don't know what the car in front of me ordered. I mean, I think they were ordering like chicken sandwiches for everybody that worked at Lakeside Hospital or something like that, because it just took forever. Have you guys ever had to like wait like that before? And then I thought I was going to take a shortcut to Willowdale. I took 168th Street instead of 180th Street, and like one of the stoplights was out, and there was construction, and I was late, and I got there, and I pulled in. It was like 2:30 by this point. So David was obviously just there waiting for me. Actually, just waiting for his chicken sandwich. I just happened to be in the car. So then I'm getting ready to leave, and like at Willowdale, they have like one of the lanes. Like you can't like get out of the car. You're supposed to stop and get your kid, but apparently the car in front of me wasn't aware of that, or they were aware about it and they didn't care. So they were out of they were nowhere to be seen. I couldn't leave if I wanted to. Now the person behind me was very annoyed. Like they were honking and like, can't go anywhere here. Like, she's not in her car. I like can't drive my little sedan over the curb, and so I just kind of waited there. And like the person behind me got so mad, and like she actually got out of her car, and like went and like she waited by the car that someone had gotten out of, and like it was very interesting. Like for 2 or 3 minutes there, I thought I was gonna have to go up and break up a fight. I didn't have to, thankfully. So like I was running behind. I went to get Benjamin at Russell, and like they changed the rules. I guess there was like a new policeman that was there, and like we parked in this curb every day for like the last 2.5 years, and they wouldn't let us do it, and the traffic was just a mess. And like the rest of the day went downhill from there. I won't even share with you what happened after that. But like, have you ever had one of those days before, like where it just like totally tests your patience? I think most of us have. Have you? Anybody today? Like, you there yet? So we got one at least, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so patience is what we're going to talk about today. Patience, and listen to what patience is. Patience is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset. So that's what patience is going to be. Patience is going to be the ability to accept, tolerate trouble, suffering without getting angry or upset. Now, I want you to think of what patience is not. Patience is not simply the ability to wait. That's not what patience is, because we all have to wait. Like if you're in line at Chick-fil-A, you don't have a choice. You have to wait. If you're in line at Willowdale and the car in front of you is empty, you have to wait. There's no way around that. So patience is not simply the ability to wait. Patience is then how we behave while we're waiting. So patience is then how we're going to behave while we're waiting. So what I thought was really interesting this week as I was kind of researching patience, the first word that God uses to describe the word love is patience. So Paul gives us the best description of love in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, starting in verse 4. And Paul starts off with the words, he says, love is patient. Now there's other words that Paul used to describe love. He said it's kind, it's forgiving, it's persevering, it doesn't give up. He said all those things, but the first word that Paul chose to use was that love is patient. Now, think about this, like when delay happens, okay? So delay is going to happen, trouble is going to happen. Suffering is going to happen. So when these things happen to us, when, not if, but when, like we can really react then in one of two ways, okay? So like think about like the delays, think about the frustrations, think about the annoyances, the pain, the suffering. We can act in one of two ways. One way is we can get frustrated, we can get angry, we can get short, all these things. That's one way. Way number two is going to be we can respond with patience. We can respond with patience. And think about this, like Paul, Paul gives us like these things called the fruits of the Spirit. You can read them. It's in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. One of the fruits of the Spirit is going to be patience. It says there's love, there's gentleness, there's joy, all these things. But one of them is the fruit of the Spirit. It's a gift that God gives to us. Now, I don't want you to leave today thinking, okay, if I could just be a little bit smarter, if I could just be a little bit stronger, if I could just get some type of formula, then I could be a more patient person. That's not the way that it works. Patience does not come through willpower or strength. I want you to hear this. Patience is not going to come through willpower or strength. Patience is going to come through prayer and practice. That's how this works. So you guys have heard me tell stories when I was a chaplain at a mental health institute. One of my coworkers, well, let me go back to this first. This is going to be a relevant issue for a lot of us. So do you guys remember back in 2014 in January, if you were here back then, I had you guys like choose a word for 2014? Like, so you had a word like for the entire year. Now, we actually kept track of these. Do you know what the most common word selected was last year? Patience. Yeah, it's not a trick question. I mean, I'm talking about patience as patience. So I'm working with this, she's a sister, she's a Catholic sister, a nun. I was like in my late 20s at the time, she's like in her mid 70s, and she was like, do you know what her name was, the nun? Patience. It wasn't Patience, that's a good guess, it was Mary. I mean, you got 1 out of 2 chances, either Patience or Mary. So her name was Mary, and like, Mary was always like the most joy-filled person that I've ever met. Like, I mean, this was a tough job, and, some of you got tough jobs. I'm not saying this is any tougher than any of them, but, for 8 hours, we'd deal with people with, bipolar disease or deep depression or schizophrenia, and, we'd, like, you think about these things, and I knew that, God loved everybody, and, why would people struggle with some of this stuff? But Mary always just had this, like, this contagiousness to her. So we're doing our notes at the end of the day one day, and I just looked at her, and she had this big smile on her face, and I was like, Mary, I got to ask you something. And she's like, what's that, my child? No, she didn't say that. She said, sure, what is it? And I asked her, and I said, how is it that, like you're the happiest person I know. How is it that you're this way? And like what she said was absolutely amazing to me. It totally changed me. Like she looked at me, and it was a simple answer, and she said, Craig, I've asked God for joy every day for the past 50 years. Joy is one of the gifts of the Spirit. It's one of the fruits of the Spirit. She has asked God for the same thing for 50 years. And it's no wonder that this woman, I mean, even in this tough environment, like could have this type of joy. Now, here's where I want to go with this. Patience is going to be the same way. Like if you want patience in your life, I mean, just think what your life would be like if for 50 consecutive years or 30 consecutive years or 10 consecutive years that every day you just took 10 minutes or 10 seconds out of your day and you said, God, give me patience. When you're in that line at Chick-fil-A, God, give me patience. When you're waiting in line at the school, God, give me patience. I really believe that, I mean, you don't need to go to Google and, figure out the 7 steps to becoming patient, because that's what we can do. I think we go to God, and God gives us this fruit of the Spirit, this thing that He uses to describe love. So, like we live in a world, like listen to our world that we live in. We live in a world of fast food, of speed dating, of overnight delivery. Like we have this thing, it's called instant what? Yeah, they said instant patience at the first service, and that's not going to work out. That's like irony, and that's not how. But yeah, instant gratification. Like we live in this world of instant gratification, and we choose instant gratification over long-term wellness. Sometimes we're tempted to make decisions based upon our short-term wants rather than the long-term good. So I want you to hear this. Patience is going to be tough. Patience is not always going to be an easy thing, but one of the things that patience is going to do is it's going to reap rich rewards in our life. And I'm going to show you a little bit what I'm talking about right now.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
All right, so it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did?
Yeah.
You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
All right, so patience is going to be tough, but it yields rich rewards. Now, the world is going to test out your patience. It just is. Like, you're going to be tested with your patience. Like, have you ever been to like Target or Walmart where they have like 18 lines available and like 2 of them are open, and both of them have like 26 people with a cart full of stuff? The world's going to test our patience. Or like if you've ever tried to call like an insurance company and you get into this like loop where you push 1 and it gets you this other loop where you have to push 3 and it just like takes forever. Now, I'm going to tell you though, like, this sermon is not about marshmallows. It's not about parking lots at elementary schools. It's not about drive-throughs at fast food restaurants. You see, these things, this is not what patience is about. All these things you're going to do is they're just going to reveal the patience that we have. They're just going to reveal it. Patience is going to be critical. And this is a spiritual issue. It's going to be critical in 3 areas of our life. Area number 1 is going to be patience with ourselves. Area number 2 is going to be patience with others. And area number 3 is really going to be patience with God. Now think about this like with yourself. Like when we can have patience with ourselves, what's going to happen is this thing called growth. Now, St. Francis, he said, have patience with all things, but first of all, have patience with yourself. Now think about what this looks like. Like, you're not perfect, okay? I'm not perfect. There's none of us that are. And like what happens is when we demand perfection from ourselves, we are always going to disappoint ourselves. Stop trying to attain the unattainable. Stop playing like, the comparison game. Cut yourself some slack. Give yourself a second chance. Learn from your mistakes. Laugh at yourself. I'll say this, like, if you're not where you want to be in life, that's okay. Because I don't know of anyone who is. Just realize that, like, you are where you are. You may have made some mistakes. There may have been some cool things that happened. But just, figure out what those next steps are and how is it that you're going to move from where you are to where you want to be. I think for many of us, the harshest critic that we can have is going to be ourselves. And I think it is this wonderful gift that God gives to us when we can be patient with ourselves. Now, when we can be patient with others, what this is going to do is going to be grace. We're actually going to give others the same grace that God is giving to us. Now, I want you to know this, like, nobody else is going to be perfect either. Okay, just like we're not perfect, nobody else is going to be perfect either. When we demand perfection of other people, what's going to happen is we are going to be disappointed every time because we are expecting something that they simply cannot deliver. Now, I'll say this, like, the biggest moments in your day are not going to be at the stoplight at 180th and Q Street. It's not going to be in the drive-thru at Chick-fil-A. The biggest moments in your day are going to be like at 3 o'clock in the morning when that 2-year-old baby is crying and you're tired and you just wish that kid could go to sleep. And the biggest part of your day then is going to be, can I be patient with this kid that God has given to me? I would say for some of us, the biggest part of our day is, I was a youth minister for 10 years. I never once met a perfect teenager. I don't think that kid exists. The biggest part of our day is when, we have to extend some grace to that kid because that kid's not perfect. That's going to be the biggest part of our day. If we have a boss that just demands too much from us, the biggest part of our day is going to be extending some patience to that person. Now, being patient with another means that we accept them as God accepts us. Their world is going to be better because of the patience that you give them. And your world is going to be better because of the patience as well. Now, I'll tell you this, long term, it's going to be a whole lot easier moving forward with patience in life. Think about this, like, it is going to be so much better, it's going to be more rewarding, it's going to be more fun, encouraging and supporting than it is going to be belittling and criticizing. Anybody can belittle and criticize. Anybody can do that. But to actually encourage, reward, support, and that's something special. Then the last one is going to be the faith that we have in God. Like, I think that for many of us, the patience that we need the most is going to be patient in God and God's timing. Like, instead of telling God, like, our plans and our schedule, I think a lot of us, we'd all be better off, listening and discerning. So for some of us, it's like giving up control. I know that some of you like control. I know that some of you love control. I know that some of you have a very unhealthy relationship with control. And, like, give it up because you're not in control anyway. Like, God's the one who ultimately is in control. And when we can have patience in God, what that means is that we trust, we have faith in God's vision, and then we also have faith in God's provision. So we're going to look at a couple in the Bible that they could have used a lot of patience. They got in trouble because they weren't patient with each other, they weren't patient with themselves, and they certainly weren't patient with God. So I'm going to go to Genesis chapter 15, verses 1 through 6. Now, in the first part of the sermon, I'm going to call them Abram and Sarai. It was during the middle part of this text in Genesis that God actually changed their name. So in verse 1, Genesis chapter 15, sometime later the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I will protect you, and your reward will be great." So God now is making the promise to Abram, but Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son?" Like, he's waited for this son forever. He's seen all his buddies get sons. He's waiting. Since you have given me no children, Eliezer of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You have given me no descendants of my own, so that one of my servants will be my heir. Then the Lord said to him, no, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son who will be your heir. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, and think about this, like don't think about an Omaha sky, think about like a sky like if you're in the country and it's just totally dark and you look into like a clear sky. That's the sky that Abraham would have been looking at. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, look up into the sky and count as many stars as you can. That's how many descendants you'll have. And listen to what it says in verse 6. And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. So here, like God made a specific promise to Abram. He said, Abram, I want you to look up into that sky. And you see all those stars, all those stars are going to represent, like, you're going to have more descendants than you see stars in the sky. Like, you're going to have kids, and their kids are going to have kids, and their kids are going to have kids who have kids, and you're going to be the father of this great nation. Like, that was a specific promise that God gave to Abram. Now, I think that for many of you, I think that God has given you a specific promise, and I don't know what that is. I'm not privy to your private life with God. But I do know that God has given us general promises. You know, there's promises that all of us in this room can cling to. I remember there was a time when Jesus looked at a bunch of tired people, and Jesus says, come to me, all of you who are weary, all of you who carry heavy burdens, come to me and I will give you rest. So the rest is that we go to God, or the promise is that we go to God, and God is going to give us rest. Now there's another promise. The promise is forgiveness. Like you're forgiven. You know, because of the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, like you're forgiven. There's nothing that you have done that God says, you know, I can't forgive that one. It just doesn't happen. Like the promise is that you are forgiven. Like there's another one. This one's in Isaiah chapter 43, and God makes this promise all over the Bible. That's just the one I picked. God says through the prophet, he says, when you pass through the fires, they're not going to burn you. When you pass through the deep waters, you're not going to be overwhelmed because I am with you. Now, this is a really cool promise. And the promise is this, that when we go through life's most difficult times, that God is with us. That he's not going to leave us. It's his problem, or it's his promise. Now, there's one more I want to look at as well. This is from the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus is preaching the Sermon on the Mount. And he says something like, when you seek God first, what God is going to do is give us everything that we need. You know, so there's this promise of provision that when we put God first in our life, God is going to give us what we need. Now, let's go back. I'm just going to just like flush one of these out for us. And here's where patience comes in, because these things don't happen overnight. Don't think microwave, think crock pot here. Like that's the way this thing works. So like there's a guy in my office a few weeks ago, and him and a friend of his, who was another guy, had a big falling out. And like the guy just said, you know, I'm messed up with this. Yeah, I said something to this guy who's been my friend forever. I can't take it back. You know, he said some things back to me, and like we hurt each other, and I can't get over this. Now, one of the things that I prayed with him before he left my office that day was the gift of patience. Because this wound is not going to heal overnight. It's not going to heal with a 45-minute visit with a pastor. Like, that's not the way that it works. You know, one of the things that he had to do is practice patience with himself. You know, he had to get past the point where he said, you know, I messed up and I ruined this friendship. He had to get past that point. Now, there had to be, in his relationship with the other person, patience as well. Patience from both parties, that if they want to get better, if they want to heal, if they want to move forward, that because the hurt here is so deep on both sides, they're going to have to practice patience with each other. You know, the first conversation might be something like, you know, I don't know why I said that. Let's look at our 10-year history and let's not look at that 10-minute conversation. You know, are you willing to move forward with me? Like, you know, it's going to be a gradual process of healing. Anytime there's going to be a process of healing, there's going to be patience that's involved. Now, we're going to skip up to Genesis chapter 16. This is the next chapter. So here's what happens when we don't have patience with God. Here's what happens when we're not going to give up control. Here's what happens when we think that our plans and our timing is better than God's plans and God's timing. So now Sarai, Abram's wife, and this is verse 1, had not been able to bear children for him. Now remember, it was just a little bit ago that God promised Abram, that they were going to have kids, and a lot of them. But she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her." Is that like the dumbest thing you've ever heard in your life? Like of all the bad ideas, I can't think of a worse bad idea than this one. Like this one has just got the potential for disaster. Now Abram, he's like, yeah, sure, that's cool with me. And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. Verse 4, so Abram had sexual relationship with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress or her boss, her master Sarai, with contempt. Now you saw this one coming from a mile away, like, hey, I got his kid, you don't, ha ha ha. So then Sarai, she goes back to Abram. Sarah said to Abram, this is all your fault. I put my servant into your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me. So now these two people are fighting. Abram replied, look, she's your servant. You go deal with her as you see fit. Then Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. Now, this is just like the tip of the iceberg. It gets worse. I mean, we're still dealing with these consequences today. So what happens is Sarah can't have a kid. She goes up, hey, I got this idea. Hagar can have your kid. We'll be one happy family together. It's not the way that it works out. God has promised something. It's not Sarah's timing. It's not her plan, but they do it anyway. Now all of a sudden, Hagar is pregnant. She's saying to Sarah, ha, 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 I got the kid. You don't. Sarah, she gets mad at Abraham. Hey, take care of her. Abraham said, no, she's your servant. You take care of her. So then Hagar leaves. The kid's gone. Ishmael's his name. He's nowhere to be seen. They take off. And this has got disaster written all over it. Anytime that we put our plans and our timing ahead of God's plans and God's timing. Think about this, what happened here? Ishmael is going to be the father of, the religion that we know today as Islam. This was created from, Sarah's not willing to let go of some of her control. Now, I want you to look at what Paul says in Romans chapter 8, verse 25. But he says, but if we look forward to something, so think about what Sarah and Abraham were going through. But if we look forward to something we don't yet have, and listen to what he tells us. For all the Abrahams and all the Sarahs out there, listen to what Paul says. We must wait patiently and confidently. Now the story continues in chapter 18. Sarah, or Abraham and Sarah, their names are changed at this point in verse 11. Abraham and Sarah were both very old by this time, and Sarah was long past the age of having children. So she laughed silently to herself and said, how could a worn-out woman like me enjoy such pleasure, especially when my master, my husband, is also so old? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Why did she say, can an old woman like me have a baby? I love this next thing. For all of us who are in between a rock and a hard place, for all of us who have this dream that's not come true yet, for all of us who are waiting, listen to what God says. God says, is anything too hard for the Lord? I'll return about this time next year. Now God has given him a timetable, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she denied it, saying, I didn't laugh. But the Lord said, no, you did laugh. You're not going to convince, God knows what's going on. It's I remember a few months ago, David was playing, and I was outside with the dog, and I come back in, there's this cross that was on our table in the foyer, and this is also the place where David plays Nerf basketball, and he knows that, he needs to be careful when he's playing this, and the cross is broken on the thing, and, I know, who did this and what happened. So I go looking for David, and, I see this great big, blanket on our couch. And underneath this blanket is this big 75-pound kid hiding underneath there. And it's Sarah's trying to say, no, God, I didn't laugh. I trust. She didn't trust. She laughed. She didn't believe. She didn't have the patience that was required. And I think a lot of us are like that kid. Like what we'll do is we'll, climb under that blanket and we'll hide, because we don't have the patience to have this perseverance that God is calling us to. Now, the story concludes, at least this part of the story concludes in Genesis chapter 21. Like, this is good stuff here. So, verse 1, this isn't going to be on your screen. I just add this part. Verse 1, I love let me just read these first few words, okay? Genesis chapter 21, verse 1. The Lord kept his word. Okay, so that's what God does. Like, God keeps his word. So God says, I forgive you. God is going to keep his, even if it takes you like 10 years to process that and embrace it and experience it, God is going to keep his word. For all of us who are tired, God is going to keep his word. When we go to him, he is going to give us rest. Because that's what God does. He keeps his word. So the Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. She became pregnant and she gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age. This happened at just the time God said that it would. And Abraham named their son Isaac. 8 days after Isaac was born, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded. So Isaac is a son. So this is really cool. So Isaac, his name is actually, in Hebrew, it means laughter. They named him after Sarah's laughter when God told them that they would be pregnant. Now Isaac had a son whose name was Jacob. Jacob wrestled God at the river, the Jabbok River. And God here changed Jacob's name to Israel. So the dream, the vision, the promise had come true. That this guy Jacob was going to be the father of the nation, and Abraham was going to be the great-grandpa. The provision had happened. Now, here's where as I wrap this up, I want to be really crystal clear about what I want our next steps to be here. Now, you can't say, okay, Craig has talked about patience. He said that woman prayed for patience for 50 years. Therefore, I'll do it, and I'm going to be patient for the rest of my life. That's really cool. No, it's not going to work out that way. There's an old Norwegian proverb. I love this one. It says, little drops of water wear down big stones. See, I think you got some pretty big stones in your life. I know I got some pretty big stones in my life. I think you got some pretty big stones in your life, and the way these stones are going to be worn down is not through some big type of machinery. It's going to be those little drops of water over long periods of time. Paul, what he says in Romans chapter 12, verse 12. So think about this. Think about those big stones in your life. Think about your challenges. Think about the things that frustrate you. Maybe it's getting over some of the stuff you're dealing with yourself. Maybe it's a relationship that's just not clicking on all 6 cylinders. Maybe it's a promise that God has made to you that just has not happened yet. Okay, if this is any of us, and I think this is all of us, listen to what Paul says. He says, rejoice in our confident hope. Be patient in trouble and keep on praying. So let's make this real for all of us now, okay? Let's say that, and just think what your life could look like then if you could experience patience for the rest of your life and take this journey where these drops of water gradually just make this stone so smooth. For ourselves, see, I think some of you are tired. I really do, because I hear your stories. I think sometimes life is almost just a little bit too much. What would it look like if you could be patient, if daily you could go to Jesus and just experience the rhythms of his grace, to experience the beauty in his rest? I think there's probably some of us, like that guy in my office a few weeks ago, that we go back to the past, we can't quite get over it, and we ask ourselves the question, I wonder what my life would have looked like if I would have just done this a little bit differently. Or if I would have just said this thing, or if I wouldn't have said that thing. It's the past, so you got to get over it. You got to. Patience is going to, be patient with yourself. God is patient with you. Practice patience and start with yourself. Now, I think that for some of us, it's going to be our interpersonal relationships where patience is going to be most helpful. Now, I don't know about you. I got 2 great kids, but they're not perfect kids, and they give me an opportunity to practice and pray for patience, on a daily, if not hourly basis. And Just think about that. Like, don't demand perfection from somebody else because they're not perfect. Give them the same patience that God has given you. Think about like your interpersonal relationships, like if you're married or if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or if you got like some buddies at work or something like that. Just extend the same grace to them that God gives to you. Seek to listen so that you might understand them and not necessarily to respond to them. Patience is going to be, if you want to make your relationships incredible, practice patience. And the last one is then going to be just our patience with God. Now, God has probably made you some specific promises, and I think that's really cool. That's going to be between you and God. I can only speak on behalf of the general promises. But God says, I'm going to give you rest. And I know that some of you here today are going through some tough times right now. And I want you to remember that promise that God said through Isaiah, that when you go through these floods, when you go through these deep waters, that I'm going to be with you. Just be patient and know that God is with us in the journey. And think about this, like the people of Israel, what they did is they escaped from Egypt and they made it to Israel. But do you know how long it took them? It took them 40 years. The trip that should have taken probably about 5 or 6 weeks, it took them 40 years. But you know what? It was during that time in the wilderness that God just did something amazing in them. It was during that time in the wilderness that they grew. It was during that time in the wilderness that they discovered who they are, and it was during that time in the wilderness that they discovered who God is. There's a promised land that's waiting for all of us. But let's just embrace the wilderness and know that God is going to do something in us. And because God does something in us, then what God does is he will do something through us. So let's pray.